Arizona's kind of reworked its entire economy, its tax base, its regulation. And now we have a budget that had a shortfall, a $1.4 billion. They were able to sit down at the table and get it sorted out. There are going to be some that are happy and some that aren't. Where does the Chamber of Commerce sit on what you've seen in this budget?
Mike, thanks again for starting with that question. We've had a lot of time to talk about this budget. Look, this budget, I don't think you can talk about this one without talking about last year's. And if you remember, I came on your show after last year's budget was introduced, and we were hot. We were not happy with it. They were given an over $2 billion surplus last year, and they spent it away on what you would call pork. Just very individualized special interest projects. And those projects, a lot of which now have been rolled back in this year's budget, by the way, were a bad use of those funds because that should have been a bridge. We knew we were going to see a revenue dip following the tax cuts, and to have $2 billion, that should have been enough to carry you through until these out years when we start to see it. So we're not thrilled with this cut budget, I'll call it. Everyone has to go through, if your household overspends 1 month, you're going to take a look at your finances. You're going to make some decisions. No one's going to be happy when you're cutting back on, streaming services or anything else to get you through. But I would argue we didn't have to get here. We could have been more responsible with our spending. And there's some things that were cut in this budget that don't make a lot of sense that we're going to have to revisit, talking about the universities, talking about some things with the Commerce Authority, which I'm very happy and grateful that we got our continuation for 5 years plus, which shows some commitment from the legislature, but there's still some outstanding encumbered funds that have to go back and be readdressed.
But is there a silver lining in that? Let's go to the university. Is there a silver lining in this that with that revenue stream stopping, that they can find other ways to get the revenue that they need that might end up being a good thing in the long run?
Absolutely. If you go back to when the prior Governor Ducey, came in, there was a over $1 billion budget deficit that he had to work through. And with that, very tough decisions were made. A lot of cuts had to happen. But that really kind of reset the priorities for the state. We were able to come back that next year, and we looked at university bonding, for instance, and we granted a lot of authority to the university to do their own bonding, to be able to build and to help with their R&D facilities. And the same can happen here. But think about it bigger than that. We can identify more dedicated revenue sources. I think we have to do that with our universities anyway. They can't always be dependent on the whims of a legislature or a governor. So we need to get some stabilized revenue funding. I think Dr. Crow would agree with that. I've heard him talk a lot about that. We're committed to working with him on that. I mean, you cannot deny that the universities are economic drivers, and not just our public ones. Grand Canyon is a fantastic economic driver for our state too. Grand Canyon University is doing great things as well. So I do think any investments that we make in them, we see a great ROI, and that's true across the board. When the Commerce Authority dealt with cuts the last go around, we went to the lottery and were able to address giving them a little bit more money for their Competes funds and their Competes grants, and that's yielded all these projects you're seeing now.
Well, and let's marry the two of those for just a moment. You've got the Commerce Authority that's been able to bring business and industry into Arizona, but at the same time, without the engineering school at ASU, without them delivering the qualified people to do some of these jobs, does the tech industry, do we see TSMC, do we see Intel expanding here in Arizona if they don't have that pool of people to draw from that are graduating from that school?
Absolutely not. When I've taken these trips to Taiwan, as has the new governor, when you go, talent and labor is a huge factor. And to be able to say we're going to graduate 30,000 engineers from ASU over the next 5 years, I think the number's like 33 now. That's a big deal. That puts us number one in the country for kind of growing our own talent and labor pool here. And it really does make a difference. When a company like TSMC, $40 billion invested into our state, is making a decision like that, they want to know that you have the talent, that your competitiveness environment, and by that I mean taxes, I mean the cost of doing business, and also infrastructure, so grid reliability. And Arizona has the second most reliable grid in the country thanks to APS and SRP. And those three factors are probably what we talk about the most when we're making these deals.
Danny Seiden is joining us. He is the president and CEO of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce. When you look at what's in this budget, but also specifically, you are a nonpartisan organization, which is one of the things I like most, is that your observations are just about what's best for business in Arizona. What do you look at when looking at a legislator and supporting a legislator or not? I would say endorsing a legislator. What's the criteria for your organization in looking at that?
Great question, and one of our early endorsement lists just came out. And how it works for us is, as you know, we're made up of a very large board of all the, I would say, large, small, medium, and even entrepreneur employers in our state. And they get together, and we have to cross a 65% threshold of our whole board to get our endorsement. And that's where I get my marching orders from. That group gets together. they look at where have they been on the key votes for the chamber, for the economy, for the state, and then what are their focuses? And it's not, we don't agree with anyone 100% of the time. And we're looking for those people who are like, I'm not going to let the economy be collateral damage for politics as usual. I'm not going to let Arizona's, economic momentum. There's people out there, Mike, and this is where it's very frustrating, who would rather see our economy tank than they can use that as a target on elected officials and say it's because of them. People still have jobs. They have to go to work. We can't afford, again, to lose our momentum, to be sacrificed to partisanship. So I'm proud of us being nonpartisan, but we're laser focused on the economy. We're laser focused on making decisions that benefit the state. And this is the #1 state in the world to do business.
It's interesting. I want to talk about the future in the next segment. But before we shift gears, we talked with Karen Taylor Robeson recently about the balanced budget amendment, and about the need for this and to mandate that the federal government balance the budget. The numbers out today, almost $2 trillion in annual debt, $56 trillion in less than 10 years nationally. But is Arizona, because we are kind of a microcosm of things, as we were talking about off the air, nationally, but in Arizona, with all of the political dysfunction and the political rancor, at the end of the day, you had conservatives in the legislature and a very progressive governor sit down and hash out an agreement in a budget. If they can do it at the state level, and we do it every single year, do you think it needs to be mandated federally that they have to sit down and do the same thing?
I would argue it already is mandated, and the way we're doing it now is a violation of all kinds of, laws and how it's supposed to work. Because, for instance, you're right. We did pass a budget. We did get it done before June ended and before we hit into July. I think there were conservative. I don't even want to call them conservatives. I think there was different factions both on the left and the right. We've been happy going into July and arguing about this and doing continuing resolutions and really mimicking the way D.C. does things. We can't print money here. So we have to pass that budget. Right. And that's kind of what's been happening back in D.C. Something has to change. This is unsustainable. I mean, Congressman David Schweiker, who you've had on and we've had in front of our board a lot, has been talking about this for over a decade.
He has.
He's been warning us that we're going to hit the point where the deficit and treatment of the deficit was going to eat up the largest portion of our budget, and we're there. And so we need reforms. We need entitlement reforms. We need that across the board. So I think Karen's right. I think she's onto something. I would never say that Arizona should be a model for anything on this because, again, when past budgets have come out, you can kind of pick a theme for it and say, this is the education budget. This budget is going to protect education and invest in education. Our last two budgets have kind of been like, what do we have to do to get a budget done, and let's do it. And that's not, I don't think that's strong leadership or direction for our state. What I want to see is for us all come together and say, you know what, these are the priorities of Arizona. This is the Arizona we want 10 years from now. We have to think about us as future and where we're going. I know that's the next segment, but in order to do that, you have to invest now. So that's what was missing from this budget. But yeah, no, I think DC, it needs something. It needs handcuffs, guardrails, whatever you want to say. Absolutely.
All right, Danny Seiden is with us. He is the chairman of the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce and Industry here in the state of Arizona. We've been talking about the Arizona budget from a business perspective, a chamber perspective. Looking forward, I talked with the Senate president in studio this week about this budget, and I asked about the future. We saw this budget shortfall of $1.4 billion. Looking forward, do you believe that's going to be the case ongoing, or are we turning a corner here where we're going to be able to see a stabilized budget and growth that we need?
If you look at the projections, they did a great job. I'll say this. The governor, President Peterson, Speaker Tillman did a great job of closing this budget gap, looking at the outlying years where our revenues will be. So, yes, I think they have. But there's one big thing they did not do that could have really helped, Mike, and that's the extension of Proposition 123, which is, again, going back to Governor Doug Ducey. He raised the distribution of the land trust. It's set to expire in 2025. It's not accounted for in the budget. It's nearly $400 million. We're talking about with the snap of a fingers, you're helping to close a major budget gap. And you can do things addressing, school facilities. You can, a lot of it will go to teacher pay. Some of it goes to the universities as well. So it needs to get done. I imagine there'll be a special session on it, but that can really help close this budget gap once and for all.
And when you look forward from a business perspective, I look at a couple of different things. What's happened here in Arizona, the two things that I think Arizona has been amazing at in the last 10 years was, number one, reduction in redundant and unnecessary regulation, which I think is also as costly to businesses in many times as being overtaxed. and cutting the tax rate and leveling the tax base. I think it's done wonders for industry here. So you look at that compared to the federal government, where it seems to be the opposite policy, and yet the debts we're creating there. Is Arizona staying on that right track business-wise, where you believe the growth we're seeing is a sustainable growth moving forward, that we're seeing major jobs and really high-paying jobs coming to Arizona consistently?
Absolutely. You look at all the numbers that we're leading in, whether it's advanced manufacturing, whether it's the battery technology that's coming in here, and these huge manufacturing investments. Mike, when you brought about 10 years ago, before we had really diversified our economy, if we had a job announcement that was $100 million and 100 jobs, that would have been front page news, and we'd all been excited about it.
There were times when it was.
That literally is like an average Tuesday for us right now. I mean, we're killing it. We're doing a really good job. And yes, it's sustainable, but, and I'll say this with a but, we have to be able to build. We have to be able to grow. There's a report that just came out in Texas that was interesting, that people are complaining about them being underwater in their homes because Texas overbuilt in their home construction industry and their apartment industry. And that's a good thing. That's how the market works. No offense to our Attorney General, who thinks it's collusion between online, pricers, but the simple reality, it's supply and demand. We need a bigger demand. I give Senate President Peterson a lot of credit for this. In the Arizona Commerce Authority continuation, 5 years, which we're really excited about, one of the things he put in was something that's going to be tracking regulations at the city level and permitting at the city level, and kind of like a competitiveness analysis that we can look at and say, what can we be doing better? How can we work better with our cities and make sure that they're able to permit these companies and that we're building enough houses? So we give him a lot of credit for that, and Governor Hobbs for signing that yesterday. But I think we're going to pay close attention to this. We are going to grow sustainably, and we should want growth. All the problems that come with growth, we want them. If you're not growing, you're dying. I'm looking at these states putting out their numbers right now who are losing their population. It's depressing. I don't know. You don't want to live in a state where people are fleeing. You want to live in the state where they're coming to. And we've been top 5 for growth for years.
We're talking with Danny Seiden. He is the chairman of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce. So as far as housing goes, I've been pitching this idea, and we need a municipality because the state can't control it. But if there is a municipality that would say, we believe that if we are allowing builders to build on smaller lot sizes, smaller square footage requirements, and some of these HOA requirements that cities are mandating, if we would do that and just say, we're going to build a community for affordable housing, you're going to get cops and teachers and firefighters and entry-level lawyers and people not making big money right now, but are able to buy at a lower price and enter the market. That strengthens the economy of that city, but of the state at long term, doesn't it? Do you think that's something that would work?
I absolutely do. And my gosh, there's one of the most interesting statistics that I have seen is, if you look at, we've had a lot of conversations about homelessness and how are we addressing homelessness. But what is one of the most linking factors where you see a lot of homelessness? Some people want to say it's drug use. Some people want to say it's mental health crisis. But affordable housing is the one constant. It's there in every city where there's an increase in homelessness. There's an affordable housing crisis of sorts because people can't afford homes. Yeah.
We talk about, the phrase is food insecurity, but it's housing insecurity as well. 100%. People that are in danger of losing their housing. I want to ask you before I let you go, the question about in all of this, and it's in the budget too, a part of this is water and the future of water. The governor's expressed concern about West Valley development. It's a thing around the country. Does Arizona have enough water? Which we think we do, but in the future, planning for it, there was $1 billion to be set aside for the future of water in Arizona. Part of that money was swept away. What's your view on that in the budget, and do we need to restore that future investment?
We absolutely do. We absolutely do need to address the false narrative that Arizona doesn't have enough water. We do have enough water. We're the only state in the country that has this 100-year water assurance. So if you build a house, Mike, anything we just talked about, you have to show that you have 100 years. I'll give you Texas as an example. They don't have that, and they're having their own water crisis right now. They're in a treaty with Mexico. So along the border, it looks like some bad news for Texas. They're not getting as much water as they thought, but they have no assurance. Either you want to go build a house in that area, you want to do ag farming, you don't know where your water is coming from. That's not the case in Arizona, but we should always be thinking about the future and, augmentation technology around desalination. And I think that's really what WIFA was built for. It was built for big ideas to addressing. That's why the prior governor signed it $1 billion. Now they've swept twice from WIFA right now, and I know that Chuck and that organization are doing the best they can. They're looking at how do we make investments, but it's turned into a lot more small ball stuff. They need to restore funding so that WIFA can look at big picture stuff, big picture augmentation projects instead of just small ball conservation.
Well, whether it's desal or it's a pipeline of water from somewhere, the future of Arizona and growth to ensure that no matter what happens, no matter how much we grow, we're forward thinking enough that we're going to make sure we have what we need.
100%. You know, we're survivors. You know, I love the East Coast media that has multiple times predicted our death. You know, Arizona will be a ghost town by 1950s. By the 70s, there won't be anyone living. It'll be a Cadillac desert, empty and rust everywhere. We're thriving. We're growing. Meanwhile, people are fleeing those places where they write those stories about us. I suggest they come out here and learn just how great Arizona is.
Listen, I love talking to you anyway, but I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're busy, and I'd love to have you continue to come back on a regular basis and talk about the future of Arizona and the economic growth and the places where we can do better.
Mike, I really appreciate it. Love coming on. We actually have a grant we're doing right now for the Arizona We Want. It's the Arizona 2030 project. Would love to come on and talk to you about that.
Absolutely. All right, it's Danny Seiden from the Chamber of Commerce.
Thanks for watching the Mike Broomhead Show. Catch up on Amazing Arizonans, a KTAR News podcast, and click the button in the middle to subscribe.